Well, hi everybody, ain't it groovy? Ain't you sick of hearing that for the last 150 years?
Mechanics of government, you don't feel part of it, like you can affect it or change it in any way. You stand up for Parliament and people get elected and all the parties look the same and it just seems like a big mess, and you just feel like, oh, I don't want to do this, I'd rather go and hear a good record. You know?
The young and rebellious Joe Strummer, the man who put credible rock and roll into the bastard cultural orphan that was called punk. Joe died in December 2002 at the all-too-young age of just 51. This film is a celebration of Joe's life and his music.
I'm not too big a man to cry, yeah, so I can cry. I miss him.
He was a lovely guy, beautiful person.
He always had a corner to fight, you know, always had someone to stick up for.
We'd seen him around. Joe'd been playing in his band, the 101ers, and they were already playing around town, you know, and we used to go and see them a lot, and so we were quite impressed at the fact that he'd already been on stage, you know, and so and we hadn't been on stage.
You know, he had that fantastic haircut all the time, you know, with the quiff and the way his leg just pumped, and he had his snare. And he always used to do downstrokes on the guitar, so it was, you know, he looked like a pneumatic drill when he was playing. And when I first went to join the band, he didn't have any teeth left, you know, he had his teeth done later. But he gave this impression, he was like dangerous, you know, he was a force to be reckoned with.
We saw Joe in the Dole queue over, Paul and I, we were in the queue, and he was in the other queue over in the Dole office, so... And he was thinking we were going to do him over and stuff, but we weren't going to do him over. We were just looking on in awe, really, and we were like, because he'd done it.
To see him wrap round different people and to be as nice, kind and forthcoming was a privilege to watch, and I was privileged to have him as a friend.
I went backstage and Joe was trying to tune up just before they went on, and me and Steve crept up behind him, we're going, aye, aye, you know, trying to put him off. And he turned around and he said, so, Sex Pistols, eh? We'll see tomorrow night. And that was the show. We were supposed to be doing a double headline with it at Nashville.
It was like he was plugged into the mains. You know, his left leg was going.
Joe Strummer was born John Mellor in 1952 in Ankara, Turkey. His father was a diplomat, and the young John Mellor was packed off to public school. Joe Strummer would find this middle-class upbringing a problem. The most radical punks made it clear that his background seriously undermined his punk credibility. After dropping out of art school and spending time in Newport, South Wales, Joe returned to London and lived in several squats in the Maida Vale and Notting Hill areas. In the late 1970s, there was a serious shortage of affordable housing. Activists and the homeless would invade an empty house, of which there were many, and claim squatters' rights. Joe stayed in several of these properties, and it was there that he met one of his oldest friends, Timon Dog. Timon, a virtuoso musician, tried to teach Joe how to play the guitar.
And he started on the guitar quite late, really, for somebody to start on guitar, 21, 22. And I decided to take the violin, so we thought we'd practice instruments on commuters, which we did. We took our Chinese shawm down there and Indian harmonium. The first song Joe ever learned was Comes the Rain, and this was a tune that, it was a Navajo Indian song, a simple song, and I just put a tune to the lyric from this Indian book, and it only had kind of one chord. Comes the rain with me, and you could do it with just G. He was very confident as a character, but he thought about music, and he recorded just one chord. Like I said, this song's got one chord, and he just played it, and we recorded it on one of those little battery, one of those, mono things, and we were playing, and he says, "Is that me?" I said, "Yeah, that's you playing that G chord," because he actually had a great sense of rhythm, and he was a fantastic rhythm guitar player, basically. And even when he just learnt one chord, and I said, "Yeah, that's you." I said, "And it sounds great." And he went, "Wow, it sounds really good." I said, "Nobody knows you only know one, maybe two chords because of the way you play them." And he was off then. He went, "See ya."
Busking with Timon had given Joe a taste for performing before an audience, and he set about forming his own group.
The 101ers was 101 Walterton Road. Now, that was a real squat. That was squatted. And Joe put together a band from basically the lads who were in that house. They'd learned a few chords and they were going to do a gig. They put it on an old pram and wheeled it. And that was, if I think of Joe, I think of, wow, he had a fantastic character that he, because you could sit around waiting for phones to ring and waiting for record deals and then. I remember standing with Joe and we saw the Sex Pistols. There was an atmosphere. It was like cutting through all that foggy stuff. And then the 101ers got up and played, and they were so sharp, so hot, and they were getting fantastic reviews, and Joe did an amazing performance. And at the end of that performance, Joe went, "I'm packing it in. The Sex Pistols are where it's at."
We sort of started to realise that Joe was going to be the guy we wanted to try and get in the Clash, probably best candidate, so to speak, for the lead singer of our band. But we didn't know how we were going to get him, because why would you join a band that done nothing when you're already in a band that was quite happening, So, but he was smart enough to see the way things were going, and when we eventually offered, we went to see him. They were playing at the Golden Lion in Fulham Broadway, and I think Bernard, our manager, went backstage and sort of gave him, said, like, "I want you to meet these guys. Do you fancy joining up with these guys?" And gave him some time to think about it, maybe 48 hours, and then called after 24, couldn't stand it any longer, and said, "Do you want in or out?" And he said, "I'm in."
The Clash were now a band. Along with Joe and Mick were Terry Chimes on drums, soon to be replaced by Nicky Topper-Hedden, and Paul Simonon on bass. These four people gelled immediately. No one, though, could have guessed how well they complemented each other. I'm so bold with you. You got to. Yankee.
stars and stripes. Let's raise the Watergate tape. All salute the new age. Oh, nobody escape. Yankee, stars and stripes. Let's raise the I don't know. All about the blue age. Nobody say, I'm so bored with the USA. I'm so bored with the USA. What you got?
And punk music, because it's so basic musically, one of the most exciting things about punk music is it's all about, it has to be about other things. It has to be about the message, or it has to be about the clothes, or it has to be about design and fashion.
It's like the whole debate, like, what is the punk ethos, you know? Because now you're being told, oh, you have to do something a certain way or it's not punk. Well, the whole idea of punk was that you just don't do what anybody tells you to.
After we'd done the Bill Grundy show and punk became known as an entity in itself, all the punk bands were, the second division bands, became much the same. They was all barking up the same tree.
I bought what little punk music came out and I loved it because I got really just cheesed off with just flabby music, really. And apart from going to see Lee Brillo and Dr. Feelgood, I didn't really find anything that I thought was exciting. It just seemed flabby and pompous nonsense.
Gossip will get you anywhere. Ooh, live with your fist. The British Army is waiting out there. They wait 1,500 tons. White you, black you, better find another solution. Why not phone up Robin Hood? Let me say, evolution.
The Clash's first album, entitled simply The Clash, sold well and put the band at the forefront of the punk music scene along with the Sex Pistols. And in the course of all this happening, Joe became one of the greatest frontmen in the world of music.
He's the best rock and roll frontman ever. As a performer, he was the best, you know. He was someone else. When he went out on that stage, he wasn't a human being, he was something else. He was something other than a human being. And, you know, he was born to be a rock and roll star.
Joe was the only guy out there that really stood out. There was lots of other frontmen and that, but he had something special, really special. It was a bit like watching like someone that one would imagine Eddie Cochran or something, if you could see the way he moved around the stage and his kind of complete dedication to what he was doing.
I frequently saw Strummer jump into the audience to keep going. You know, there's more than Iggy Pop doing that kind of thing. And he was quite keen on all that interaction. He was quite happy if people jumped up and sang along with him. If people threw bottles at the stage, which they did for quite a long while in the early period of punk rock, he didn't walk off stage and say, like some bands do, and say, I cannot continue, I am an artiste. He'd just dodge them, rather like a boxer. I always thought Strummer's movements on stage were very boxing-like, in that he was not a graceful man, but he was stocky and he had his eyes about him. He was good at dodging stuff like that.
I've never seen a man work a crowd so well as a frontman for a group.
Joe never had any fucking effects on his guitar, you know what I mean? It was like, turn it up, let's fucking get on with it. And we did get on with it.
Aside from the constant movement in the leg, it was just the sheer intensity, the ferocity at times with which he sang the lyrics, as though every word might be his last. You had the sense that not only had he written these lyrics, but he somehow felt the experiences that had shaped them.
The Clash, and Joe in particular, had a unique relationship with the fans. They would help them sneak in without paying. They would put fans on guest lists and even put them up for the night, sleeping on the floors of their hotel bedrooms. This engendered intense loyalty to the band, and Joe in particular.
Because it's a democratic band, and because it's a thinking band, and because they actually practice what they preach, people come back to the hotel every night. So people that like follow the tour are put up on people's floors. Whoever's got space, we'll put people up. The people who are travelling to the next town can kip down in people's rooms, but not if you've pulled, right? Because this isn't a church outing.
Yeah, it was just something which I've never really been able to fully put my finger on. He had that charisma, he had that sparkle, that rock and roll attitude. It was all that I ever wanted to be, all that I ever dreamt about being. Was a Joe Strummer, the sneer, the anger. It was me. He was putting it out for me.
Even his later gigs with the Mescaleros, people are absolutely, I've never seen people so ecstatic.
I mean, I think Joe is someone that a lot of people could relate to, and it's probably why, they have such a... With the Clash, it's not like it's not just music. It's, that's your band. There's no, small Clash fans. It just... If you know a couple of songs, it's not a Clash fan. That's why when you meet a Clash fan anywhere, it's like, oh, yes, you are into the Clash. You are, one of the hardcore,
You felt part of them. They made you feel part of them. They weren't like any other band where you came, you saw, and they went. You were there, you felt part of them, you became a friend, even though they'd never seen you in their lives or never met you. You became one of them.
I wanna move the town to the Clash City Rockers. I need a little jump of electric shocker. Better leave town if you only wanna knock us. Nothing stand the pressure of the Clash City Rocker. See the rhythm they come down the escalator. Now listen to the tune train accelerator. Then you realize that you gotta have a purpose, but it's gonna knock you out sooner or later. So don't complain. But you used to say
The band constantly progressed. We changed our look all the time. We stopped dressing as punks, I think, after the first album. And we got into suits and and we were all big fans of American music anyway. I mean, Joe was a big fan of rock and music. I loved soul music and jazz. Paul was like reggae, Mick like ecclesiastic version of everything.
In hindsight, it was great that he moved on to other albums, especially the London Calling album. That was, fantastic playing that live.
Joe had to reinvent himself in order to communicate to those people, and I think that's the fundamental thing about the Clash, is it managed to get through to people that ordinary rock music doesn't. That's why they were so important. That's why they were able to change culture.
When the band signed a £30,000 agreement with CBS Records for their next album, Give 'Em Enough Rope, purist punks condemned them. They said it was a sellout. Equally, as the band's music developed, these same punks complained that they were leaving the solid basis of punk behind, and as such, some called them hypocrites.
There was a point in 1979 when the Clash first went to America as a tour, where Joe at home in England is having difficulties because people in England were so excited with punk, and they're now looking and saying, well, what was it all about? You've all moved on, you've worked with an American producer, you made an album in America, come on, you're just becoming a sort of boring old rock band. Meanwhile, Joe's wandering the streets of Camden, or he's knocking around Notting Hill without a penny in his pocket, You know, I mean, you know, he doesn't know what's happening. All he knows is he's in a great band, that he's meeting loads of people, he's changing their lives. But the press are having a go at him. Everybody in the NME is kind of turning against him.
Certainly I was aware that there was a backlash in their homeland, if you will, against Joe as the spokesperson, if you will, for the band and the Clash more generally. At the same time, I felt that was grossly unfair and a bit of a parochial, what I later learned was a Little England kind of attitude.
They could have split up after the first album and not called themselves The Clash and done something else, but they didn't. I think they did something more courageous than that. They thought, well, you know, punk is finished, we're going to move on, we're going to do something else musically more interesting. But punk music is very difficult because you can only ever make one punk album, really. Or if you were the Ramones, you managed to make 3 punk albums. But at some point, if you want to be a band of any kind of greatness, you've got to move on. They go to America, and with America, they no longer have an identity crisis. They go over there, they don't see them as punk rockers. They don't even know what punk rock is in the English sense. All they see them is rebels. And the Clash just fitted into that absolutely perfectly.
America's the promised land for Joe Strummer because it's home of rock and roll. When I first took up with Joe, when living here in Camden Town, the whole rockabilly thing was real big. Ray Campion, the Rockabilly Rebels, blah, blah, all those other people, Johnny Mann. And Joe loved to get out of town, you know, just jump in a motor and go up to one of the big rockabilly jobs up in, I don't know, St Albans. He seemed to always be up that way. Occasionally I'd go up, and he loved to dress up, put all the gear on. He was a natural for a quiff. So Joe's record player reflected America.
Certainly after 1979, early 1980, with the release of London Calling, I think the mainstream music press, Rolling Stone, and papers that came out on a daily basis, New York Times, Boston Globe, LA Times, were treating the Clash as a rock band, first and foremost. It was the case that in the US, the Clash were having an impact and were attracting people on the basis of the fact that they appeared to be rebels against the system, not just in Britain, but internationally.
All across the town, all across the night, everybody's turning with full headlight. Like a white to turn it on the face, who lives with it? Everybody's sitting around, watch television. Wave, in and out the light, a great traffic system, so bright, I can't think of a better way to spend the night, speeding around in the yellow light.
There was his public persona, and he had to be seen, he was the front man for the Clash, you know, he had that persona. That was enormously at odds with the real John Mellor, which was a very private person who was in a lot of ways, a very shy person.
I always found Joe a paradox between being a very private man, alone with his thoughts, and being a very open man and sharing them. And there was no way of knowing which way that was going to go. I would say right until the end, I knew him very well, I didn't know him in the same breath, because he was a man that could just shut down, alone with his thoughts.
Joe was an incredibly sensitive person. I mean, most, people who knew him, he was sensitive, yeah.
I mean, I don't know what actually changed people's lives, whether it was the lyrics or the music or both, you know. I like to take a bit of credit for the music, but I'm sure a lot of it was Joe's lyrics as well.
I started writing with Joe the first day we got together. He came to our squat in Davis Road in Shepherd's Bush, where we were all waiting for him, and we had this little room, tiny little room in this squat where we were all staying, and it was like we put egg boxes on the walls, and it was like the smallest bedroom, no bigger than this by this, you know, me here to the camera there. That's about the size of the room. We all piled in there, and it was like kind of like, well, we got some songs, and he had some bits and pieces, and let me play you one of mine, and it was like, I'm so bored with you, and he sort of misheard it or said like, no, that's really good. I'm so bored with the USA, you know what I mean? No, I'm so bored with you, you know what I mean? If you put S and A on the end of that, that's one of the first things we ever did.
And as like with the Dylans and the Morrisons, you know, the picture that's put in your head, lyrically, it just gets me every time. I think he was a better lyricist than he was a singer, and I think he thought that as well. I've heard him say before that he thought his stronger points were his words. I love his words. His words are fantastic.
We had the tune. We just didn't, you know, we didn't have the extra bit. It was when we got Joe, it was like we had the last little bit that we needed, you know what I mean? That was what made it all... Yeah. It gave us another dimension, really, to what we were doing. It helped us all step up, and like to a next level, you know, and that was helped. And then we used to just sit down and write songs together. It was like... for the first album, it was like, well, quick, we need another song for the album. We'd go and rush upstairs and knock something out. And later on, when we got really good as a partnership, you know, we used to sit at one end of the table, type out the lyrics, and knock them out just like that. He'd be sitting there like a newspaper man, and he'd write the lyrics out straight like that, pull it out the typewriter, and hand it over to me on the other side of the table. And I'd sit there and I'd knock out the tune, just like that. It'd take half an hour.
There's a lyricist, Joe was up there, you know. I think his best was as good as his own heroes, Dylan or Tim Buckley.
He'd get the ideas and the thing and then shoehorn them into the melody, which he ended up with a very unique style.
To be able to rebel in music was fantastic, you know, and to have a songwriter, a wordsmith like Joe, that you know, was constantly blown away by his lyrics all the time, all the way through the band.
Like later on, when you kind of reassess things and all the time that's passed since, you know what I mean, and now it's become the magical partnership that we weren't really aware of at the time. We weren't really aware of anything like that, and we certainly never thought we would be sitting here now. Like now, doing, you know, talking about it and that, all these years later.
I have no fear. I live by the river.
I think it was a burden to Joe that people expected him to change the world. I don't think he expected to change the world, and I do think there were times when it was a very exhausting business being the man who was about to change the world. His take on it would be, I'm paraphrasing him, but you know, he was interested in changing the way people think about the world, and there is a difference in that. So he didn't shy away from the problem of being the figurehead of that change, But if you're asking for a saviour or a messiah or a Führer, no, he wasn't the man and he didn't want it. He liked time out. He's just a human being, and fuck it, he was just a rock and roll singer.
I think in the Pistols camp, for all Joe's earnestness about it, we thought it was a little bit naive, some of it. You know, some of the things they were kind of going on about, maybe you didn't have to go on about because everybody knew that anyway. But, you know, I think Joe was a believer in, you know, not letting the buggers grind you down and putting you in your place. So, yes, he was right about certain things as well. It's just the way you kind of go about it. A lot of it could be a bit sort of agit-prop out the back of time out.
I was always amazed at his patience, particularly on tour in any strange town. He was always curious, you know, what did people do? How did people live their lives? What went on in this place? And he'd ask people. He's a good listener, actually. For a man that had the verbals, he'd listen well. But when it came to being offloaded on, well, what are you going to do about it, Joe? I did think he was patient, but he got it non-stop. Yeah, he did.
Wide run! Wide run! Wide run! Wide run! Black men got a lot of problems. They don't mind for the break. White people go to school, but they teach you how to be fake. And everybody's doing enough to buy it while we walk the street through chicken, even tired.
After riding high for 6 years, tensions began to stretch the band's loyalty to each other. Topper had a long history of drug and alcohol abuse that made him too unreliable. Joe sacked Topper. Mick and Joe fought continually over ownership of the band. Joe sacked Mick. By the mid-80s, it was all over, and Joe had to face some home truths.
Joe was the one who gave Topper the word that he was fired. Joe was the one who told Mick. Joe said, my ego told me, yeah, get rid of him. He can carry it on. He couldn't. You know, he carried on with the band. Paul Simonon was hardly in the band at that point. It was basically Joe Strummer plus Cabaret Clash tribute band behind him.
I drove up from Kent, watched the show, and I thought it was awful, terrible. And I went backstage afterwards. Bernie was back there. Bernie Rhodes was manager again. He shouted, who let him in? So I felt really welcomed. And Joe came out of the dressing room. We stood in that drafty corridor there by the backstage door. And he said, he looked at me. I had an awful suit on. I'd bought it the week before to go to a cousin's wedding. And he said, that's a terrible suit, Johnny. And I said, yeah, it is pretty awful, isn't it? But not as bad as your band, is it? And he cried. I felt terrible having said that, but it was the truth. And Joe would never ask anything other than, one of his great phrases was always, you would tell me, wouldn't you? And he never said what that meant, but to me that meant if it was crap, then you would tell him, you'd level with him. And so I did then, yeah.
It was inevitable that the whole thing would actually blow out. It was inevitable because of the conflict of personalities within the band, because of the way they all had enormous egos, rightly so, because of the creativity that was in each of the members of the band. You got to remember that band was like something else. Topper was the best, and still voted the best top 5 drummers in the world.
I don't think at the time we realised how we complemented each other, you know, but we did to the fact that the four of us, if any one of us had gone, it would have collapsed. But we didn't realise that till it was too late. You know, we kind of got a bit sort of blasé with the whole situation, a bit complacent, and egos took over. You know, Joe thought it was he was the leading star. Mick thought he was the leading star. I thought I held it together musically on stage, therefore I was inexpendable. It was just one of those bands that were just, you know, through God's will, the four of us turned up in the same place at the same time.
Joe was very passionate, very emotional, a lot more than he let on, And the whole thing with throwing Mick out of the band, he never let go of the guilt. And throwing Topper out of the band, he always said the day the Clash died was the day I threw Topper out of the band.
When he sacked me when the band sacked me, which was basically down to him, I think it was like tough love in a way. I think they were hoping that, you know, things would happen and I'd get myself together. It said that they looked me up shortly afterwards, but I was still out there using, and so they couldn't get me back. I think in a way they were hoping that I could get my act together, which I did, you know, about a year ago.
It took a long time to get over it. That's why it was for all of us, I think. Well, we all did. But we became friends very soon afterwards. We kind of fell out and we didn't get back together again, but we became great friends and we remained so throughout that whole time. We didn't feel the need to get back together again, which is probably a good thing.
After the Clash's implosion, all of the guys were in shock.
It was like a come down. That's, you know, when the Clash were up, I think it left such a hole in all our lives. Not just the music, but the friendships, the life, everything. It was when that ground to a halt. It was like, what do we do now? You know, and for me, the depression after the band was intense. You know, I just my answer to it, which wasn't an answer, was just to take more drugs.
Young punks.
It would be 14 long years before Joe made a serious attempt to put another band together. During those years, Joe dabbled in politics and rockabilly, but the world had moved on, and Joe Strummer was slipping into obscurity.
The voice of a generation, and it was the burden that Joe had, and he spent half his life trying to downplay it. And then when he threw Mick out of the band, that's when Joe decided to be the voice of the generation. The trouble is the generation had grown up and they were listening to Spandau Ballet.
To add to Joe's sorrows, both of his parents died within a year of each other.
He lost his band, he lost his parents. He's a bit lost, must have been. Wouldn't be surprised. I think we all were kind of dazed for a while.
He became trawling the bars of Notting Hill. You know, he would just be wandering about the pub. I'd see him in the pub, you know, just bemoaning the fact that he'd let the greatest band of the world slip through his fingers. Mentally and emotionally, it took him 10 years of doing films, dressing up as a fat Mexican bandit or whatever, you know, having a stab 89 at a solo career. Meanwhile, watching Mick go on to achieve with Big Audio Dynamite. I mean, Joe cycled around an island in the Bahamas looking for Mick for 2 days.
Eventually he found me and I was quite excited about the new album. I said, come over to the studio. We had a studio quite close there, and come over and listen to the first BAD album. And we went to the studio, Joe and myself, and we were listening to the whole record. So I said, what do you think then? He said, never had a load of shit in my life. Right, let's get the group back together again. And but it was a bit too late, and we often said, well, oh, come on, let's get it back together again, but we never did.
For a while in the mid-90s, Joe's attention was drawn to dance music.
Joe would never have come back with the Mescaleros if it hadn't been for Richard Norris and Roger. He never would have made a return or, you know, left that final statement.
Joe's integration with dance music was probably through taking his first ecstasy tablet.
His kind of sort of epiphany and his kind of realisation that dance music was pretty good, I'm sure came from the Glastonbury experience, going to Glastonbury that year for the first time and sort of having his big kind of campfire sessions. So yeah, I just kind of hooked up with Joe straight away then, and we recorded all kinds of surreal nonsense down there with whoever we could kind of grab and get into the studio, and Joe would just be shaking maracas and kind of encouraging people to do whatever they were meant to be doing.
In the end, dance music did not represent an achievable dream.
We went to LA to try and do a soundtrack thing. He was already over there. It was for a film, Grosse Pointe Blank, and he just rang up and said, "Oh, you've got to come over, you know, we've got a great studio, let's go over, record, let's do loads of stuff and we can get it all on the soundtrack." And I went over and it didn't quite work out. There was sort of a lot of distraction and a lot of not much particularly got done in the studio. We a lot of stuff actually went on the album, but it wasn't really happening, and we kind of fell out after that. I went home in a black cloud, and I didn't really speak for a couple of years.
Tonight there was a power cut in the city of madness. Conversation died in the burst of a solar flare. In the darkness an angel won the beauty pageant. Stroboscopic snowflake fell from a stratosphere. All in the hour, blew down funky Broadway, shorted out the eastern shore. Only saxophone and a beach trombone. But up to shout out, bleeding for the rays of a morning sun. Somebody tell me clearly, has the new world begun? And all the way
in 1999, 14 years since the demise of The Clash, Joe was finally back on top form again. He put together the Mescaleros, all of them great musicians in their own right, including Timon Dog and Pablo Cook. They were playing world music, which was by now probably Joe's exact niche.
The Mescaleros was Joe finding some people he could work with, writing as ever, scrawling his lyrics and doing it his way.
Well, Joe likes a groove. You know, we spent a lot of time listening to what he got really into. It's Cumbian music, which is all a sort of very simple, percussively based African music. And it's kind of odd. He would sort of call me up at 3 in the morning, you know, from the studio, and say, "Oh, we've got this great tune, man. We've got this great tune. You know, can you come to the studio?"
I'm lost and I'm jack in the city of nerves. Only dead men stomp on the brake pedals in the city of nerves.
Go to the studio and there'd be fuck all on tape. They'd just be like, you know, a cowbell, like a straight 4/4 signature. And I'd say, right, well, where's the track? And so a lot of the time I think he used to like to build up the music just from percussion. That's when we realised that, you know, songs like Willesden, the Cricklewood and Yalla Yalla are fucking good songs. You know, they stand alone, you know, not going to be Radio 1, but, you know, they're going to get a chance out there.
We're so fortunate that he came back. I mean, especially the younger fans, it was such a great thing to be able to see him perform. It was such a treat, you know, because he didn't have to. You know, Joe didn't have to come back, but he did.
Yeah, I think he was really enjoying. I mean, of all the gigs I did with them for the last 2 and odd years, I think he enjoyed virtually every single one.
Baby, baby, come on, sugar.
He liked to play. He always liked to play, and he was happy doing that, you know, and he liked to play for the people. And that's like what he'd always done, you know. And so I think he was happy about that.
And by the end, he was enormously reconciled with his inner man.
Very, very happy. He was newlywed to Lucinda, and he couldn't have been happier. There was no happier man I could see.
Come on, sugar, what came into me?
I think when he was coming out after the Clash, I think he was really hard on himself and thought that he had maybe let everyone down, because he wasn't this, you know, person that maybe he himself had made himself up to be. But when he came back, he seemed really sort of triumphant, like, I've done it this time. And then he went out at the top.
She's supposed to you, she ain't never coming back. She ain't never come back. She ain't never come back. She ain't never come back.
In the autumn of 2002, Joe Strummer and the Mescaleros played a benefit gig for striking firemen at Acton Town Hall. It was there that something magical happened for the first time in 20 years.
I bumped into Mick Jones in the audience, and I thought something special is going to happen.
I just went to support him, but I didn't have any intention of going on stage or anything. It was just felt compelled when I was actually in the audience and I heard the first notes of Bank Robber, and I sort of went, hold me coat, and I went up.
Play the guitar now.
It was so good and atmospheric and that, and I just felt totally compelled to just get up there. And I went up and Joe went like, play guitar now. He was quite pleased to see me, and it was really nice, and we played this number, and then the next number, he didn't tell me what it was White Riot, and we used to have a little bit of a problem sometimes about should we play it or not.
The key of A, you know what, Luke Bullen.
And he went to the A position, which is the first chord of it, and he didn't say it, he went, you know it. He didn't say what it was, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we went into it. And then we played London's Burning, appropriately enough, as the last number. It was really wonderful.
London's burning! London's burning! All across the town, all across the night, everybody's driving full headlights. Black or white, you turn it on your face of new religion. Everybody's sitting around watching television. London's burning, look down. London's burning down. London's burning, look down. knock for a home to the empty stone, 'cause I'm alive. London's dirty with a border now. London's dirty, London's dirty with a border now. London's dirty, hey.
Joe's driver told me that he was driving him back home that night, and he said, "So what did you think of Mick getting up then?" And the driver said, "Oh, I thought it was great." And he goes, "Bloody cheek." But he was just kidding.
At that moment, Topper walked in the door and the phone rang. Topper was standing there. He picked the phone up. I realised it was Mick Jones on the phone. And I watched Topper, a small man, just dissolve into his fitted carpet and shout, "Oh no," turn around, throw the phone right at his mantelpiece and throw himself on his settee.
My first thought when I heard Joe was, fuck, that should have been me. You know, if anyone in the Clash was going to die a premature death, that should have been me.
My daughters and I sat in the car and the rain was coming down. It was, you know, as if the world was crying with us. I don't mind admitting, I cried my eyes out in the car.
I got a Christmas card the morning before I heard the news. I opened the Christmas card, you know, he goes, underline, Merry Christmas, double like that. He was really good at underlining things, you know. Merry Christmas. It was just like that. Enough from Joe and the family, so. Like I said, I think he was on a high. I think he's still on a high, he's still going. We're following him all the way.
At first I thought, what's this, you know, it's like, I think I was hearing it right, you know, obviously. And it was kind of just, you know, I don't know other way to explain it than just, you know, life, if you like. It just is the most unexpected thing.
His legacy was for those people who knew him, and I was lucky enough to be one of them. The legacy was that there was a man who could continue throughout his life to hold values constant and to actually fight for them and to do something positive.
He was always bringing people together, and I think that is also, I think that's probably his legacy. I mean, he's so many people I've met, I mean, just personally through it, even since he's passed away.
The legacy Joe leaves is in everybody who ever saw him or ever met him, and in the music, everyone who ever plays the records. And yeah, I think it's about very simple things. It's about questioning authority, personal dignity, and treating people with respect.
One of Joe's greatest legacies may turn out to be Strummerville, a charitable trust which funds money and support for young musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds. A proportion of the proceeds from Viva Joe Strummer are being donated to the Strummer charity. Strummerville is also a generic name for Joe's gatherings at major rock festivals. He started at Glastonbury and continued with large groups of friends and fellow musicians and anyone with a vibe. They gathered to sing, drink and hang out around campfires bestrewn with flags.
When Joe and Luce got married, their wedding present from us was backstage tickets to Glastonbury. And Joe was like, all so excited. Ooh, great, great, great Glastonbury. I don't know what Luce was like. So, and Joe said, what shall I bring? And Master said, bring some wood. And Joe rented a Luton van and filled it full of wood and brought down the campfire.
Every time I went to go to the studio up at Joe's house, it inevitably ended up starting a campfire, listening to some tunes, and then it just grew and grew and grew until, you know, we were having campfires in hotel car parks.
Don't hang around with no mob.
And no luck on that Martell.
I know what happened, it's a long story.
What? Go on, where is it?
Okay, Jarvis had a bottle of brandy.
Right.
Exactly the same mate. Exactly
Yeah, the campfire, then probably the next most important thing would be the ghetto blaster and the music. And, you know, there'll be a lot of different music from all over the world. I mean, it was very much, you know, very interested in you know, cumbia music or, you know, African music, different styles, or, you know, Lee Dorsey or, you know, or lots of different reggae things. And it was, so it's basically just a gathering at the campfire, and it was a fairly 24-hour situation.
Is this the biggest one you've made, Joe?
I think we have topped ourselves, yeah? We are. That was one of those magic moments, actually, when you put it up and you stand back.
Yeah.
And you think...
Don't quite realise it.
Because on the ground it doesn't look long.
He started off over a campfire conversation, which was a conversation regarding global warming and CO2 emissions. And Joe was like, well, let's plant trees. Let's plant trees. Here's to drinking. Let's all plant trees. Here's to drinking and planting trees. And he was like... At that time, Dan Morell was there, and Dan Morell then set up Future Forest, which is now planting millions of trees a year. And that's what Strummerville Charity is about. It's about enabling people to do it themselves, giving them that little extra help, that little leg up that everyone needs.
Ain't got no reason to drag her around. I'm the right kind of colour in the white part of town.
I think about him every day, yeah. And he's sort of like a bit like Einstein dying or something like that. It was, you know, there's so much there and it's never going to be repeated anywhere else, you know what I mean? It's so original.
Ain't got no pound, nor any dollar or quid.
I was lucky enough to see him. He played at the Shepherd's Bush Empire a couple of months before his death, and you know, it was great to go and see him. The sad thing is that when I went backstage, he said, "What's that you're drinking?" And it was beer, and he knows I'm an alcoholic. I really wish that the last time he'd seen me, I would have been, "That's a Coke," you know. That's kind of my one regret.
And a white man got the law, and I know.
He enriched my life. And I'd have done anything for that man. You know, I'd have killed a man for him if he'd have asked me at that point. I was hook, line and sinker in there with him on it. So yeah, thanks, Joe.
No thanks. I gave it up.
White people go to school, but they teach you how to think, and everybody's